Right, Morena. Hello, good morning. I'm Trina Cooper. I'm the General Manager for Popup. Thank you for making time to be part of our 16th part of Pop-Up Chat today, and we're talking about Childbirth After-Thoughts. This session is being recorded and will be made available on our Popup website. Please note that your video image may be seen when we share the presentation on our website and social media, so please ensure that you've got your camera turned off if you want to remain incognito, and we ask that you remain muted. If you wish to ask a question, please use the chat function that you see at the bottom of your screen, and these will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Or if there is something important, I will interrupt our presenter and ask her the question with the slide that she's talking about. I will hand you over to Jan Klausen. So Jan is working with CHAT, Childbirth After-Thoughts, and this is a Hawkes Bay DHB Midwifery-led initiative addressing the emotional distress of mothers who experience an unexpected birth event. This may be after a birth perceived as traumatic in her current postnatal period, or demonstrating mild to moderate anxiety related to her previous birth story and a subsequent pregnancy. The aim of the services is to identify the key triggers causing her fear response, educate the woman on why she is experiencing anxiety and avoidance behaviours, revisit the birth or distressing issue by reading the hospital notes together, revise the narrative through conversation in a safe and controlled environment, and empower her to manage the symptoms in a cognitive way, thus reducing her anxiety symptoms. The Korowai in the logo is a metaphor of the safety and protection she's taught through cognitive behavioural techniques. It's her cloak of speech and hope. Te Korowai o korero e manawa ora. Jan, handing over to you now.
Well, morning everybody, and thank you so much for making time in your busy day to hear about this. And I was very thankful to Parta for giving me the platform to speak about chat, because as far as I know, no one else is doing this in the country, and maybe someone will pop up and say, actually, I'm doing a very similar thing. So I hope that that's the case. But and I also want to honour the my managers who give me 0.2 FTE to do this. I work across the midwifery spectrum at the Hawkes Bay DHB as a midwife, and 0.8 and 0.2 of that is this time with the women, going through their notes and just finding out a way through of their anxiety that's been caused by their traumatic birth. So just a little bit about myself. I'm a mother of 3 girls, and they're all married, and they've given me 5 beautiful grandchildren, which I love. And I've been a midwife for over 40 years. My 3 passions are my faith, my family, and partnering with women in their journey to motherhood. So that's really driven my life for the last, almost all my adult life, really. A little bit about chat. I guess the journey began when I went back to midwifery 12 years ago, after my time of having my babies, and it was a big journey to get back my annual practicing certificate, but I did it. And during that time, prior to starting midwifery again, I'd been working in a therapeutic community with women who struggle a lot with life, have borderline personality disorder, and often through trauma in their lives during childhood, sexual abuse, etc. And their crazy making becomes a behavioural response to their trauma in the early years. And so it was being involved with this population of women that I realised avoidance behaviour is a big symptom of trauma. And when I went back to midwifery, I suddenly was aware of women coming in 12 years after their first baby and demanding an elective cesarean because they were just so terrified of labour again. And as I talked to them, I realised that they were very similar to these women that I've worked with in the therapeutic community. So that started me on a journey of looking at, is PTSD a thing with childbirth? And it is. So basically, that's where I was at. And then after a year, I went to the bosses and I said, look, I really think I could provide something. I went and did a cognitive behaviour therapy diploma, and the rest is history. So basically, I love it, because I see insights every day with these women, and So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about this the service, and if you do want to jump in, quite happy. There's only 2 of you, so I'm feeling a lot more comfortable now rather than hundreds of people, so yay. So I'm going to go, I really love this quote, because basically this is what we do. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. So the women I work with find so much freeing of their fears by looking back at what they've been through from a perspective that is more a helicopter look. So the aim of the service is to provide a safe place for talking about the birth trauma and the unmet expectations, to build resilience through hope and to prepare them for their subsequent labour. So a lot of the women I see, they've gone to their midwife for their first appointment and they're in floods of tears because they just don't want to go through it again, and so the midwives immediately will refer them to me. So this is it in a nutshell. It's a Hawkes Bay DHB initiative.
And sorry, just to interrupt you, just a few people are struggling to hear. Are you able just to talk just a little bit louder for us, please?
Oh, sure. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so Childbirth After-Thoughts is a Hawkes Bay initiative, DHB initiative. It's I get referrals from primary and secondary health professionals. Is that better?
Maybe you can turn up your volume.
Oh, how do I do that?
If you're in Zoom, down on the, or I don't know, on your computer somewhere, there'll be something to tune up your volume.
Okay, this is very new to me. Is that better? No. Is that any better? I better go back. How are we doing? Can you hear me? Is that better? Okay. So, yes, as I say, I do 0.2 full-time equivalent for Childbirth After-Thoughts. I'm duly registered, so I can see women after the 6-week cutoff. So I often get referrals from the Plunkett and Well Child women nurses. I've done a postgrad diploma in CBT. I do make a point that it's a maximum of 5 visits, and if they need more visits after that, I refer them on. And I refer them to the GP, the maternal mental health, private counsellors, and other health professionals, and I'll talk about that in a wee while. So my parameters are they need to be pregnant or postnatal for up to 12 months. The idea of the safety is huge for the women, because if they feel safe, if we build rapport quickly and they feel safe, then they are able to korero in a way that they tell me the truth. So always at the first visit, I establish that rapport. I teach them some breathing, focused breathing, so that they really identify that I know what I'm talking about, and they feel better with the anxiety is reduced through some mindfulness and some grounding techniques and some breathing. And I always do the Edinburgh score at the end of the session, and we talk about that, and we talk about where we're going from there. And almost 99.9% of cases, it's always much improved by the 5th visit, which is great. So why I've put this in the a manawa order, the hope, is it's all about the women tracing the fear and facing the traumatic experience, then replacing the narrative with a new perspective. So that's the whole thrust of what we do in those 5 sessions. And I've just given a little an acronym here, HOPE, because I think hope is what these women want. They want to know that they're going to feel better. So, but it's not one size fits all. So it's very important to establish a framework and a partnership together of where we're going. And the insights are always very individual to the woman. So, for instance, I had a lady who she had a postpartum hemorrhage at home, and she called the ambulance. She was about 2 weeks postpartum. She called the ambulance, and felt really safe when the ambulance man arrived. She was bleeding, hemorrhaging, and they put a drip up and put her in the ambulance, and off, sirens blazing, off to the hospital. She felt safe all the way there until she got to the hospital, and it was just after Christmas, and it was a skeleton staff, and there were new house surgeons and registrars, and everyone didn't really know what to do about when she got there. And that was the insight for her when reading the notes was that she didn't feel safe. It was like no one knew what they wanted to do with her, and so finding that insight and recreating a new narrative for that was huge for her. But the symptom she had was that she couldn't, until she met with me, she couldn't drive past the hospital. So if she had an ambulance behind her, that wasn't a trigger, but driving past the hospital was a trigger for her anxiety, and she was reliving that intense feeling of not feeling safe. So that's just an example, by questioning and finding out what she really what was the time at which she lost trust in her birth attendants. That was huge. So then the next thing is O for overall perspective. A lot of women will be terrified of their coming births, their subsequent pregnancy, and it often comes down to one time. And again, reading the notes is really crucial for that. And I had one lady who we read the notes, and she said, "Oh no, I've already read the notes with the midwife, and it didn't help at all." And so I thought, "Oh, what do we do with that?" Thankfully, I had taken a copy of the CTG that she'd had for the previous birth, and it had been a crash Caesar. And it must have just been a visual. She was a visually. Some people are more visuals than they are auditory or reading stuff. And when she saw the CTG and she saw the baby's heart rate drop, and suddenly it was just like this, the light bulb went on, and she suddenly felt so much safer about the next pregnancy. So you just never know what's going to happen. It's an interesting phenomenon, and I love the breakthroughs when we get them. So the plan for their next birth experience, that's big, especially with a subsequent pregnancy. And there was one woman I saw that hadn't had a baby for 15 years. So her first baby was when she was in her 20s, and then she finally, second partner, she finally wanted to have another baby. And the birth experience with her first one was she was young, and the baby was born at 28 weeks. And when she saw the baby in the incubator for the first time, no one had warned her that it would look like a fetus, and so all she could see was this fetus in her head, and she couldn't move past that. And one of the big things too with her previous experience had been that the anaesthetist took ages to get a line in, and that was another thing that she really couldn't get past. So we very carefully planned. She met the anaesthetist. We talked about how they were going to put local anaesthetic in, and he was very good at putting the line in, and she was going to have an elective cesarean and carry the baby to term and all those things. So we planned for all the specific things we addressed. I know you can't always say that things are going to be perfectly, but she just had this amazing experience, and her midwife said afterwards it was just incredible. It was just like a healing experience for her, because all of the things that she feared the most were now null and void, because she had this perfectly planned experience. And I might add that a lot of the women that do become traumatized with their birth experience are quite used to being in control of things, and when things don't go according to how things how they thought it would, it is a very unsettling thing for them. And the fourth really important thing, establishing trust in their birth attendants. It's almost like there's this kind of vicarious experience. If I can build trust with them and they trust me, then they're more likely to trust the hospital midwives when they come in, because often it's been a time where they didn't feel safe, like the lady in the ambulance, that they've lost trust with the hospital system or the people that looked after them. And so by establishing trust with them and with their LMCs, and we talk about that, and we talk about how you're feeling, and talk about things, because no one's perfect, and it's just realizing that we are on a journey together, and we can't always make things work the way we want, but to manage the anxiety when it happens. Am I going okay? Can you hear me? Let me know. So this is a kind of a précis of what I do. Every woman, as I say, every woman is so unique and require a different care plan, but they will include some or all of these things. So I assess with the Edinburgh score at the first and last visit. We do some mindfulness and focused breathing. I give them grounding techniques for their anxiety. I always go through the neurological changes that happen with a fear response. You know, it's a normal response to an abnormal situation. And we talk about the amygdala and the fact that when you are traumatized by something, you go into shock and you can't process the memories of the situation. And that's why you get this triggering and this flashbacks that happen. We talk a bit about the process of our brains being like giant computers and trying to reboot and make sense of what's happened. And it's a bit like watching a movie and the movie ending differently to what you thought it was going to be. And so often you will dream about that movie, or you'll think about it for days, and you'll think, oh yes, now I remember at the beginning there was this clue and that happened. And so you can kind of park the movie and put it to rest. It's the same with this traumatic experience that they've had. Yeah. We do some basic cognitive techniques around thoughts. So, you know, it's not enough time to get into heavy stuff, but often there may be a core belief that the woman has that is keeping her from moving on. So so we can do a little bit of exposure. That's an example. Oh, I know. There was a lady who had baby in Germany, and she had the baby and she's absolutely exhausted, and the German midwife came in with some toast and gave her the toast, and then she said, I'd really like another piece of toast because I'm starving. And the midwife said, what do you think this is, a hotel or something? And so that was the thought that was playing, that she was just a big nuisance. So so she wanted to have a home birth, didn't want to go to hospital, which was fine. But I realized that if she did have to come into hospital, she had to have to be at peace with that. So we did a bit of what's called exposure. So we just did little steps. So we sat in the car park at the hospital, and then we walked into the reception, and then we sat in the car again, and we went in and out until we finally went to the room that she would be having the baby, a primary room. And we were meeting her midwife there, and so that she could kind of get used to her being there and everything too. And as soon as we walked into the room, it's a nice primary birthing room, the midwife, who I hadn't actually told about this whole hospital thing and hotel thing, we walked in, and the midwife said, it's just perfect, isn't it, this room? It's just like a hotel room. And it was just, oh no. But we had a laugh about it, because she'd come to that cognitive place where that was then and this is now. So it was kind of, it worked to our advantage, because it was certainly a interesting experience. But so she went on to have a home birth, and everything went really well. So didn't have to come into the hospital, which was good. So appropriate referrals for specific issues, of course. Got a lady at the moment who got a lot of pain with her first birth, and insufficient pain relief is a huge traumatizing thing for women. And so I've referred her to an osteopath, and we're hoping to get a bit of strengthening. She's got a history of having a talipes as a child, and as the pregnancy grows, she just gets a lot more pain. So that's just an example of just different people that I use. When we read the notes, sometimes something will come up, and the woman decides she does want to write to the hospital and share her experience, just in a way that it won't happen to someone else. And that can be hugely cathartic for her too, getting a response from the hospital in response to her writing the note. I haven't ever had to do a health and disability complaint, but that's a possibility, or a midwifery council complaint, but the options are there for that. And I always do a follow-up letter to the GP, the LMC, and the well child provider with the woman's consent. Some women don't want me to write to them, but I do normally, because I think this is such a team effort that we're doing together, and the GP will often be with the woman for some time to come. And then I always give them an opportunity to give feedback for the service afterwards. Yeah, so that was a big slide, wasn't it? So yeah, most chat clients report some or all of these, and this is what the research bears out as well, that if they have had a trauma or a fear response that is still worrying them and they're reliving it, that will be insufficient pain relief, loss of trust, and birth and I've already covered those two. A sense of powerlessness, and they have a sense of that they weren't in control, that they didn't have any say in what happened to them. The lady that I showed the CTG to, that was her big problem, was that everything happened so quickly, and she was used to making decisions, and she didn't feel a part of that whole decision making. But when she saw that it had to be a crash cesarean for the sake of the baby on the CTG, then that kind of made her understand it. Often there's a sense of horror, particularly I've noticed with the husbands when they're seeing the partners, when they're seeing what happens, and a lot of the women will describe their partners as not wanting sex for a while. You know, they just kind of got this sense of horror of it all. In fact, I don't know where the men go, because it's a problem for them. They can go to their GPs and get the PHO funding from, I guess, but I don't think a lot of men want to, you know, share what they've been through, and in time, I guess they come right. But yeah, 10% of men will get depression after a baby's born, so it's pretty high. This is a biggie. A woman thought the baby or she was going to die. That's another very big situation. We had one lady I saw a couple of weeks ago. She, with her previous pregnancy, she had a 3rd degree tear, and she was bleeding quite heavily, and they were taking her up to theatre to be sutured. And as she left the room, she was being taken up, the midwife, her LMC, said to her partner, "Don't expect her to come back." And so she went into theatre and under GA thinking she was going to die. That was how she. But of course, when we thought about it in a helicopter view and an overall perspective, the midwife was probably saying to the partner, "She's not coming back to this room. She'll be going to ICU, or she'll be going to post-natal." But just the words she used and how she heard it terrified her, and that was why she went into. She was pretty. She had to actually see someone for PTSD as a result. So that thought of that she was going to die was very, very real. It's so hard for us because we say things and we don't even, you know, realize what a huge effect it's going to have on women. But reading the notes was really helpful for her. Yeah. The insufficient consent for procedure. We had a case some years ago where a woman had she was fully dilated, been pushing for a while, that bradycardia. They pressed the emergency bell. It was 8 o'clock in the morning, and a new registrar just started that day, and she was from India. And she came and answered the emergency bell, asked for a forceps trolley, pulled the baby out, sewed the woman up, left the room. And so everybody was shocked. It was speedy, you know, saved the baby, which was great. But the point was that she didn't introduce herself. She didn't say what she was going to do. She just came in, did the deed, and left, which is probably how she'd done it thousands of times before in India. But it wasn't appropriate here. So that was a case where the woman that I was seeing did write a letter asking for better orientation of registrars when they come from a different culture. So it was sort of like a win-win there, but it was pretty traumatizing for everybody in the room when that happened. So insufficient consent for procedure is big, and I think we're getting better at that. I think it's really stressed in all the doctors and the midwives training now for verbal consent for things. And the previous trauma is very big as well. So a woman that may have had sexual trauma or abuse, or a road accident or something like that, when she has these same pains in labour, she's transported back to that time. So it's doubly traumatizing for her. Okay, so big slide again. Which brings me to a case study about a woman who I saw some years ago now, and she was a primate. It was her first baby, and the midwife, when she referred her, she gave me the referral form, and she said, "I can't understand why this woman is so traumatized. It was a perfect textbook birth. It was one of the loveliest water births I've ever seen, and I just can't understand it. She's told her husband he has to go and get a vasectomy. She's never going through that again." And so on the first visit, and this is something I want to stress, is that often we come in with our hat of all of the births we've ever seen, and we tend to, as midwives, we tend to base a person's experience on our experience of what we've had. But in this case, this was the first time this woman had anything to do with childbirth and didn't know what was expected. But she had a precipitate birth. It was only 2 hours from the time that the contractions really got going to the time that she birthed. And it was very quick, very, very quick for a first-time mother. And as we talked about it, I asked her, have you ever sensed that same feeling before? Not the pain, but the feeling that you had, the emotions that came with it. And what's really interesting is that for all of us, a lot of our memory sits underneath in our subconscious. So she was, until I asked the question, she hadn't really thought about associating past trauma with this birth experience. And she started to cry, and she said, well, when I was 12 years old, I was trapped in this car. I had a broken leg, and they were trying to get me out with the jaws of life, and they wouldn't. They couldn't get me out, and I was absolutely terrified because I thought I was going to die, and I had no control over what was happening, and I was trapped. And that was the feeling, the trapped feeling that she had in this pain, this precipitate labour. She was back there in that car, absolutely terrified, and didn't know what was happening, didn't know what was going. It was all about the pain. It was all about her emotions, and that was why, out of that little girl's heart of pain and hurt and agony, she just said, enough, I'm never going through that again. You've got to go and get your tubes tied, vasectomy, not tubes, vasectomy. And of course, that's what we do when we're in fear. We want to protect ourselves, and we want to make ourselves safe. And so thankfully she rescinded that wish from her husband, and by the time we'd had the 5 sessions, she was talking about having another baby. So she loved the baby. There was no problem with that. It was just, and hopefully she'll come to me with the next pregnancy, and we can manage that, the fact that she's probably going to have a very quick labour, and if she knows that it's only going to be a short labour, she will cope, and maybe we'll get some hypnotherapy, hypnobirth stuff going. But it's all about finding something that's right for her, that's going to work for her, and recognizing through cognitive behavior therapy that that was an experience she had before. This is the new experience now. So putting the previous one to bed, really. Yeah. So that was her. How am I going for time? So I guess I really like this quote as well, that knowledge is the antidote for fear. And I think that's evident right now with COVID-19 as well, that there's a lot of theories out there, but it's just the knowledge and the science and the cognitive stuff that keep us feeling safe and trusting that people know what they're doing. So in this case of the chat service, this is what gives the women the insight, is the knowledge that they go away with, and they can manage their fear. They've got a new narrative, and that the hugeness of what was big for them and the trauma now becomes a manageable issue that they can cope with in this next experience of birth. Yeah, and that's my references there, which there's lots and lots more, but I found those ones particularly good for giving examples of what they're doing overseas, trauma. And of course, great resource. I'll do a little ad for Carter. This is a great resource, PTSD after childbirth. Yeah. Okay. Ready for your questions now.
Hey,
Hundreds
thanks,
of
Jan.
questions.
Yeah, excellent. So if anyone's got questions, feel free to start typing those in. There's a comment from Shanna saying that Carla Sargent from Voice for Parents, and she sees men post-birth and who are preparing for the next birth, but she also really sees women who deal with birth trauma as well. So Carla's got a website, voicesforparents.co.nz, I think it is.
Okay.
Google it, and she's based up in the Waikato, and
Yeah,
so she does she does a lot of work, and I think she does Zoom as well, Zoom sessions too. Also, Dad Support is Kids Need Dads as well, which was Father and Child Trust, and they do a lot of support for men and Great Fathers, Dave Owens. And I think some Plunkett groups are actually doing some men's support, as well as I know Perinatal Wellbeing in Canterbury are doing men's groups as well. So they are scattered around the place. It's just a matter of sort of finding it. Do you find, Jan, that when you're talking with the mum that you have the dad in the room as well? Like, do you do a debrief with both of them?
Not normally, no, not normally. I tend to work on Thursdays during work hours, so often at work. But I have the women actually don't really want. I haven't felt that they really want that. I think it's what they're wanting to talk with someone that's totally independent of anyone else in their world, and it's also useful for talking to another midwife that's not their LMC as well.
Yeah, sure. Yep. I guess it's always the option is there if men are available and want to attend.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they're very, very welcome to do that.
That's right. That's right. They would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I don't keep them away or anything. No, but it's just interesting that like I went to see a lady the other day, and her husband was looking after the baby in the other room, but she just wanted to talk with me alone. So yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Yes. Comment from Vicky saying she's really surprised about the percentage of men with depression after the baby's born. This must have a big impact on relationship bonding and family life. I mean, 10%. That's
huge.
It's a big number. Yeah. We do have information on our website about depression after birth for men as well. If anybody wants to go and look further, we do have a resource on that as well. And a question from Katie. She is saying, do you have any ethnic breakdown regarding Maori Pacifica mama accessing support from chat?
I have. It would be probably. I only started in February this last time, so I had a break because my marriage broke up and things. But I've only just started back in February. But I would say the breakdown would be probably 30% Maori, 10% Pacifica, about 30% Indian. We have quite a large Indian Southeast Asian community in Hawkes Bay with a lot of the horticulture and things, and of course they have that increased risk of trauma because they're in a different culture, and things aren't done here the same as at home, and the smells aren't the same, and there's all that issue too. And probably, I don't know how many more percent, 40% of New Zealand European. I shouldn't actually have these figures. I'm sorry. I'm a bit like.
You better do your data analysis. So it is such a new service, you know. It's fantastic that it's offered. There's a question from Alexandra saying, Do you offer these services via Zoom at all for women across the country? Because, you know, there's always sort of a lot of rural women that can't get in.
Yeah, I haven't tried it yet, but funny if the DHB covers Wairoa, where we are, and I had a referral from a lady in Wairoa the other day, and it's 2 hours to travel up by car to Wairoa. So I talked to my manager about that, and she said, "There's no money, there's no funding, can't do that." And it was so funny because there was a guy testing the sprinklers from the Aon that do the fire people, and he said, "Look, I can take you up there once a month." He said, "Oh, you know, I go up there once a month to check the sprinklers in the hospital. I'll drop you off, you know." So I went to the big boss, my midwifery director, and I said, "Can I get a ride with the fireman?" She said, "Yeah, that's fine." So what I think I'll do is go up. She said, I can't fund you for that once a month. And I said, "Oh, okay, well, if I go up once, maybe I can explain the service to the midwives up there and give them some material, some resources, and I could possibly see a few women that would go up. And if there's because I only have about 120 births a year, so there's not going to be a lot, but we do get women being transferred by emergency for in the airplane and the helicopter and things like that. So you can imagine there would be some issues there. And that's when my midwifery director said, "Well, you know, we can set you up for a Zoom meeting for women." So, but yes, so that's a long answer, but I am thinking about it. I did try and Zoom through the COVID, and yeah, you don't get the same connection with the women, but I'd already met them. I'd already met them face to face, so it was not too bad, but I don't think we got the breakthroughs that we would have been if I'd been having a cup of tea with them and sitting, you know, face to face. So I could talk to Carla about it maybe, because if she's doing Zooms, that's possible. But again, it's funding, and I really wanted this to be a free service, so I'd rather not charge people for that. And if it was throughout the country, then they'd have to pay me for my extra time, I suppose. But
yes, it's up to other DHBs to look at funding somebody specifically in the role to have it accessible in each region.
Well, I did think about that. I thought about maybe if a DHB did want to start up a service, because it's not a new idea. In England, they have after-thoughts service, and that was where funny enough, when I set this up a few years ago, there was an English midwife working with me, and she had a colleague that ran the service in Bristol or somewhere, and so she sent me the material she used. So that's how I learned a bit about what to look for in the hospital notes, and you know, how to help the woman through it. But it's only for one session, and there's a lot of research to show that one session is almost traumatizing in itself, you know, because you don't get any more follow-up to that. So so that was why I went for the 5 sessions. And where was I going with this? Oh, so one of the thoughts I had was that I could possibly go and do clinical supervision, say for another DHB, for a midwife that was doing the chat service, and help her with more difficult cases, and we could maybe talk, and the DHB could fund me for my clinical supervision, perhaps. I don't know whether that's an idea, but I really would love to see one in every DHB. I think just the women out there that struggle, they're already struggling with a new baby, they're already can't afford to go and see a psychologist, you know, they just, and the Plunket nurses and the Well Child nurses that ring me, they are telling me that the problem's got worse. It's compounded because of the fact that it wasn't addressed in the beginning, the problem, yeah. And that's really sad, I think. Which I would say, the Maori women I see tend to be like that. They've really hung on, and they tend to be slower to get help than the European women. And I think that's a cultural thing, because maybe they have a lot of support early on, and the European women don't maybe have that same kind of support. I'm not sure. if I was ever going to do my master's, maybe I'd do a thesis on that. But it's just, it seems to be about 5 months, they fall over, and the Plunkett nurse will ring and she said, oh, she's really flat, you know, 2 out of 10 mood, and she's talking about the birth, and she's reliving it and finding not coping. And I ring her and she'll say, I rang later yesterday and she said, I think it's just starting to catch up with me now, and you know, that's possibly the reason is she's just hung on, and then she said she'd been to the doctor and got some sleeping tablets. Well, of course, hyper arousal and not sleeping is classic PTSD stuff. So yeah, and of course the longer it's left, the worse it gets with PTSD.
Sure. Yep. Yeah, there was just a couple of comments that came through saying that it's one thing to have funding from the DHB, but so many women don't want to be in the system that they experienced the trauma with. So I guess that's what you're trying to do, is reduce that trauma where they've had that experience.
It hasn't been my experience so much. I know they do appreciate having a talk with someone that wasn't there at the birth, so that we can have this more helicopter view. Yeah, it's really interesting. Sometimes in the notes you see things that you think are very insignificant, and yet when the woman reads it, she is over the moon. Like, there was a lady who had twins, and they were 28 weekers, and she didn't, she thought she'd done the wrong thing because they had twin-to-twin transfusion. What's it called? Twin-to-twin, yeah. And she'd been seen in Wellington, and the midwife in Wellington had told her, what you've got to do, you've definitely got to deliver here. You must deliver in Wellington. There's no question about this. Make sure you deliver in Wellington. So this was really put to her, have to deliver in Wellington. But she woke up one night and one of the twins wasn't moving very well. So she tried to get the Wellington people on the phone, and she couldn't get the midwife, middle of the night. So she came up to the hospital here, and they did CTG, and the baby was it was a very poor tracing on the baby. So they did an emergency cesarean, and the babies were flown down to Wellington, and they did well. They did really well. It was a long haul, but they did well. But she just kept hearing this voice that she'd done the wrong thing because the babies hadn't been born in Wellington, and that was what was playing over and over in her head. And when we read the notes, she read the operation note that the consultant had written, and it just said, because of the actions of the mother, we saved these babies. It was in black and white that the mother had done the right thing, and that was huge for her. She said overnight she no longer felt guilty, that the guilt just left her, and the blaming and all of that. And she said it was like the difference between day and night. She was in daylight now, and that was huge, just from that little thing that the doctor didn't need to put that, but that really it was a big person saying you did the right thing. And yeah, she was really thrilled with that. So you never know what's going to be in the notes.
Yeah, that just reinforces the language that needs to be used as well, isn't it? It's just being very careful with how you talk, and just selective wording, like that poor lady said, you know, she's not coming back to this room. A couple more words.
I'm very careful now with my words.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and we're just going to start rounding up. There's just a couple of other comments, but we'll just run through. It's not surprising that Maori women don't turn up early when the majority of services are run by non-Maori. So that's a very valid point. Waitemata DHB in Auckland does group therapy for mums experienced traumatic birth, but not one-to-one sessions. I know that psychologists who run the group did the presentations on the NZPS conference about it. So that's good to know.
Yeah, I have been in a conversation with the midwifery director here, and she's absolutely committed to bettering the accessibility of services for Maori, and we're trying to get some funding to actually grow the service to the point that I can train some people that are that are Maori and more accessible. So hopefully we will. That's a work in progress. Finding the money is the big problem, but I'm just so thankful that they've given us that funding. And another interesting story about a woman who I saw who'd lost her baby, and she was Maori, and she said that it was really good to have this service because she was the one in the whānau that everybody came to with their problems, and she didn't have anyone else to go to. It was kind of sad, but it was just her particular hapu that, yeah, she was the one everyone came to, and it was just like she had a husband as well. He wasn't Maori, he was Indian, I think, but it was just an interesting comment that she made, that she was very pleased to be able to share her grief and just work through, process the grief with someone else. So it didn't really matter that I wasn't Maori, but I mean, everyone's very individual, and that's the thing. One size doesn't fit all, and I'm not going to meet the needs of everybody, that's for sure. Yeah.
So we'll just finish with one last comment. We have had a few mums. We have had a few mai who had CHD, so cognitive heart defect babies, and they only talk about the trauma of their medical birth years down the track. So, you know, they've obviously suppressed a lot of that, what was happening at the time, and finally they then get the chance to be able to talk through it.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow. Yeah. I've had women aunties in the room when a baby has died, and we've had a stillbirth, and we've been grieving for this baby, and they've actually had closure for grieving for a baby that they had 30-40 years previously who died, and they'd never really got closure for that. And so it's interesting how it always stays with you, that trauma. It's always there, and but just a healing experience holding that baby, because in the old days they didn't get to hold the babies or even see the babies when they died, sadly. We've got a lot to learn.
You're doing fantastic work, Jan. Thanks so much for your time this morning. It's just a short intro to the work that you're doing, and hopefully you'll get funding to continue for another year, and it can be introduced at other DHBs around New Zealand as well.
Love that. Yeah, that'd be amazing. Okay. And it all starts with an idea, you know, and it just if you roll with the or start with the women, you know, and the need that you see for them, and then find a pathway for doing it. That's the key. Start with the passion.
Right. Well, thanks everyone for your time this morning. Appreciate you being online, and we look forward to seeing you next week at our pop-up that we were talking about multiple births next week.